Hello, and welcome to the CLB Forge podcast. This is a show to help equip you and your church for mission, ministry, and multiplying disciples. I'm Ryan Nilsson.
And I'm Mike Natal. Welcome to episode 10. Oh, now I have to get through. Thanks for that intro, Ryan. That was just great.
You're welcome. Thanks for being so cooperative.
No problem. That's what we try to do here.
I do a little countdown before we start. Mike has decided to start making fun of me. And so we just started it without the countdown.
Yeah, because we apologize for that, Ryan, but I'm not going to. It was good. It was good podcast material. Okay, let's get to our guest because that's what we're really all here for. So today's guest has a passion for organizing and equipping people to engage their community in times of crisis and disaster. She holds a bachelor's degree in psychology from CUNY College in Staten Island and attended Fordham University's Graduate School for Social Work. She served as a rapid response team chaplain with the Billy Graham Evangelical Association serving in Louisiana during the Hurricane Katrina deployment. Also, she served in San Diego during the wildfire deployment and was a part of the first team on the ground during Hurricane Sandy when it hit the Jersey Shore area. In addition, she organizes her local church's response to the devastating flood during Hurricane Irene. She's been married to her husband, Chris, for 26 years, and they have two kids, Will and Caleb. She served on the leadership task force of the Lead On initiative for the Church of the Lutheran Brethren. And she was raised in and attended 59th Street Church in Brooklyn, New York, for 40 years, serving in several ministry leadership positions there. She's currently now living in Greenbrook, New Jersey, for the past 11 years and currently attends Bunker Hill Lutheran Brethren Church in Princeton, New Jersey. Please join us in welcoming Kari Janusz. Kari, it is great to have you here, and I really appreciate it. A lot of our listeners won't really be able to understand fully what was going on beforehand, but I appreciated that you and I were able to not only talk about sports, but then also equally give Ryan a hard time before he started recording to get him flustered. So thank you, Kari, for being here and being my partner in crime. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yeah,
I love
you guys are a
being
good
together
team.
with you guys. Yeah.
Yeah, you guys talked about lots of sportsing things that I thought all our listeners would want to hear about, even though I have no idea what you guys are talking about.
Maybe we'll have a podcast spin-off where Kari and I just talk about sports for an hour, and we'll see. If we get enough responses and people actually want to hear that, then maybe we'll do that.
Mm-hmm. That would
Right,
be
you
awesome.
heard that, listeners. Let voice your vote. Podcast at clbforge.org. Let Mike and Kari know.
Hey, that even sounds like a great tagline. Mike and Kari. Sportscasting. With a CLB.
Sportscasting. I love it.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah, that's great.
It's the Mike and Kari show.
Oh,
7
boy.
hours of sports per episode. I think it'll be good.
I think so too.
Mm-hmm.
So what were we actually talking about today? We're actually, I'm really excited to have you on, Kari, because you have just started in a new volunteer role with the CLB, with North American Mission, as a crisis response coordinator. And I've really been blessed to learn about this part of your life and how God has been preparing you for this through the coronavirus pandemic. I've learned this about you, and you've been a blessing to our churches. You've been a guest on one of our weekly webinars during the pandemic. And I just think God has prepared you for such a time as this. I was wondering if you could just start off today by telling us a little bit about your spiritual journey.
First of all, I'm humbled. So thank you so much for having me on. And I'm humbled by the Lord for even giving me the ability to have this position. So I'm really excited. But I started out my journey at 59th Street. I was born and raised there. And I remember very vividly giving my heart to the Lord as a 5-year-old. there was a special program at the church, and they asked if you wanted to give your heart to Jesus. So at 5 years old, I got all excited, and they took us up into the front of the church and then into this tiny little room on the left-hand side, which is called the deacon's room. And we were all sat there, and they asked us if we wanted to have Jesus come into our hearts. What's interesting for me is this, that at that moment, there was an understanding. But I really felt like the Holy Spirit really kind of started leading and guiding me from that moment. I come from what would be classified as a broken home in the 80s. They called it that. My parents separated when I was 11, and then divorced when I was a little bit older. So I would say probably that was a big impact on my life. Being in the midst of parental discourse, and then being in a church where you're the only family that is having that. The Lord really entered into my life, and I would say really gave me a deeper understanding of people, and how even as a young child and a teenager, that there could be resiliency in the midst of crisis. And so the Lord was really good to me that way. Of course, with any journey with the Lord, you rebel at times. You choose not to listen, sometimes to the Holy Spirit's promptings. And I went away to college, and there was a big time of questioning for me. Why do I believe what I believe? Is it just because I went to 59th Street and they said this is the way it should be? So I started doing a lot of searching on my own. In courses at school, I took comparative themes and issues in religion, and really that solidified for me that I wasn't just adopting a faith that I was brought up in, but it was true. What Jesus did for us was true and was real. And in my exploration, I realized that. And again, the Holy Spirit always whispering in my ear. When I was at Syracuse, it was during, I don't know if some people remember this, but it was during the time where there was a terrorist attack on a plane. I mean, one of the first big ones that impacted the United States, which is Pan Am 103. And so 35 students at Syracuse were killed on that plane. And we were in the middle of studying for our finals. In fact, I'm getting goosebumps now, even remembering it. And, as a young adult, you don't think about being impacted by terrorism in the United States. But, there were a couple of those students that were on that plane that had been some of my courses. And a friend of mine lost his friend on that plane. And so it really made me dig deep. My first thought was, wow, I want to do something for the families. I want to reach out. How can I reach out and help others during this time? So really, I think that was the beginning of my journey. The Lord just really took me on this, this ride of experiencing, unfortunately, different disasters. My husband was down at the towers when, on 9/11. And so we journeyed through that together. What he saw, he was in ministry at 59th Street at the time, and I was helping him out. He was the youth director. And so he ended up having to work the site, and I was determined that we were going to have youth group that Friday, and we did, and we had them out at outdoors, and there was a purpose for that for me. I wanted to make sure that the neighborhood saw that the church was there for them, and that we were stepping out, and that we were going to be present visually outside the four walls. And so, throughout the course of my life, the Lord has presented me with these situations where I needed to act in a way that probably is unnatural for some people, but for me seems to be fairly natural. I don't know why. I guess it's just a gifting from him. So he's really called me into this. And I think after 9/11, then Katrina hit, and that was it. I knew this is what I was going to do. And that was my first deployment. I could share a little bit about that now, or we could share about that later in the podcast. But my journey on getting in a deployment for Katrina was I would say hard fought. I called many organizations and I wanted to be a part of just deploying. I said, I'm going, that's it. And I called the Billy Graham Association. I said, hey, listen, I'm driving down there. I mean, I was in Brooklyn, so I was driving to Louisiana. I'm like, I'm driving down there. If you want me or not, I'm going to show up. I'll find somebody that might need my help. And they're like, no, we want you. And so I hopped in the car and drove down by myself. Praise God, I have such a supportive husband, and he understands my passion, leaving behind my son with him, and was down there for 10 days. And so for me, it's just been, a journey after that, knowing this is the call that he has on my life. So, yeah, so God has been great, and giving me these opportunities. Yeah, it's been fabulous. So.
That's tremendous. Yeah. Thanks for sharing that with us, to really see how God has given you a heart for this and you've embraced it and like stepped out in faith through it. I've really been appreciative for the Wednesday night or the Wednesday afternoon classes that you have taught. I've really enjoyed to hear not only from your desire to get stuff done, but also how you see that you are totally and completely passionate about what you are doing, which is so amazing. And that's like how Ryan called you. You are in a spot where God has called you for this, and you are just walking alongside him and allowing him to use you in tremendous ways. And so one of those ways is that you're our crisis response coordinator now. And so there might be some of our listeners who hear that title and they're like, what does that mean? So I guess before I ask you what we have written on the questions, if you had to describe that to a person who maybe asks you, well, what is that? How would you describe your role, the crisis response coordinator?
So, I mean, as you said, it's a call. My husband says it's a personality. I don't know how I get people's stories, but I could stand in a grocery line, socially distanced, of course, right now. And I have I have a person's life story in my hands for some reason. By the end of standing in line. For me, being a crisis response coordinator, there's a couple of factors for that. First and foremost, as you had mentioned, I want to really encourage, edify, and equip churches to be able to reach out to their communities. And so I think that's important. I also see the Church of the Lutheran Brethren, because you're spread out so far regionally. I would love to see down the road there be people who are similarly passionate. I'm not the only person that is similarly passionate in this area to step up, and maybe we'll set up some regional teams, because if you have a small church, it would be difficult maybe for you to think that maybe you would have an impact. But if you're partnering on a regional level, that might also be another way that people can become involved. And for me, it would be helping people set this up, from beginning to end, what this looks like, paperwork as far as being able to set up policies and procedures. So I think that that's part of it also. And so also, because this is brand new, we're going to be filling out the churches and the regions and seeing what it is that they want as well. So one thing that you learn in social work is you don't step in all the time and tell people what they need and what they should be doing. You listen. And then listening, you learn what people need, what they have a desire to do, what they have the ability to do. So it would probably look unique in each church, but regionally, it would look similar as far as setting up teams regionally. So that's what I'm here for. I'm here to hear the joys and the sorrows of it all. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Take them both hand in hand, and knowing that God's power is made perfect in weakness too. So allowing people to kind of share out of their need for being heard, and also their need out of their struggle, is important. And maybe there's a listener who's listening now who's saying, yeah, I have that equal passion, or maybe I feel like God's calling me to be involved with that. And we want to cultivate that. We want to encourage that. And I'm sure that you'd love to hear from that individual if they are feeling that way. Maybe this podcast is is going to call someone into helping you in some way, which would be great. So what are some of your experiences, and you've laid some of them out, but what are some of your experiences with crisis response, and what type of training have you received to prepare you for this?
So I don't, as I said earlier to you guys before we went on to the recording part of it, I don't like to necessarily toot my own horn. I'm just really super humbled by all this, but I have taken quite a few courses and training. Because I don't memorize them, I'm going to read some of it off to you. I have certificates in grief counseling, crisis intervention, and peer support. I have certificates in suicide prevention, intervention, and postvention, and that's all from the University of Maryland. It's a Baltimore County Training Center that we went through. I also, from Crown College, have certificates in operational stress first aid, enhancing resilience, ministry in the age of pandemic, disaster training as well. So those are separate certificates. Also, I think a lot, certificates are great and education's important. I think it empowers people. And I hope to be able to connect people in the LB to be able to get similar training as well. But I think experience is important. You know, as a rapid response coordinator, a rapid response chaplain, you deploy in disasters and every situation is different. So, you know, Katrina was very different than Superstorm Sandy, as wildfires are very different. The experiences that I've had have been amazing. And talk about God coming through, again, even financially to be able to do those things has been amazing as well. But experience, just seeing how God uses somebody very fallible like me to be able to minister to other people. And it's not just about ministering, but having an ear to listen. When I drove down to Katrina, I pulled into outside of one of their convention centers in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and there was no parking. And so I was trying to find a parking space, and I went off onto this little side street, and it was a little sketchy, I have to say. But I was born in Brooklyn, so sketchy is sketchy. I could deal with it. And there's these guys on a porch. I was like, whatever. And so these guys on a porch, and you know, they're hanging out, and they're like, "What are you doing here all the way from New York?" And I'm like, "Hey, you know what? I'm down here to help out. You guys sent us they sent from New Orleans, I think it was an engine, one of the fire engines down as a replacement for ones that had been lost on 9/11. So now it's my turn to give back. And they said, you park that car there. We'll watch that car for as long as it's there. Nobody's going to be going near your car. And I just walked in cold. And the Lord was just like, go, you know, and he provided in these miraculous ways, being able to speak to people and most of all, listen to people, pour out their sorrow. And in fact, when I was down there, Hurricane Rita had just passed by as well. So some people had lost twice, twofold. So they lost during Hurricane Katrina, and then they had just moved to a new area they thought was safe, and Rita came through. And so experiences that way, you know, Superstorm Sandy, again, being the first team in, the mayor of Atlantic City, you know, Sin City, welcomed us in. And it was just amazing being able to be in the shelters, to partner with other organizations in those shelters. The Red Cross was very willing to allow the Billy Graham Association in and to help because there was so much devastation. And they learned from Katrina, partnership is important. And so it just has compelled me to do more. I helped with our one church that I had attended for a while. I helped them spearhead going out into the community post Hurricane Irene, and there was devastating flooding in our area, really terrible. And in fact, our church at that time had lost its campus, its main campus. And so yet, still in the midst of complete loss for the church, we sent people into the community to help and minister to the community surrounding us by bringing out water and offering food and things like that. So I think it's important when you feel the Lord prompt in your heart, you just go with it. You know, it might be fearful, it might be scary, but when the Lord is calling you, you go. And that's something that I've learned. As my husband says, you get ants in your pants, Kari, and I know you need to go. And so, you know, I think that's been part of the hardest thing for me in the midst of this pandemic, is because I tend to be a person who goes, and now the Lord is having me stay a minister in my area. And so, you know, we learn, you know, from each disaster and each crisis, you know, how he's going to use us. So, yeah.
You know, Kari, one of the things that I'm really excited about for the role that you're in, one of the primary things that you'll be doing is helping churches develop crisis response plans to help respond to local and regional disasters, things that are affecting the community. And as a pastor, I know every time there was some kind of regional crisis, local one, or even something in another part of the country, I really felt this this great sense of loss because I wasn't ready to help lead my church to engage in that. And every time someone would come up to me and ask me what we were going to do, and I just felt like we hadn't done any of the planning so that we could respond quickly. You know, there are all kinds of things that need to happen ahead of time to help prepare a church to deploy and engage very rapidly. You know, with our governance, our structure, there are all kinds of challenges to doing that quickly. And I just see like this is such a great opportunity to mitigate some of those challenges and help churches respond to these kinds of crises that occur. Could you just tell us a little bit about what's it like? What would that be like for a church to develop a crisis response plan with you? How much time does it take, and what's the process like that a church would go through with you?
Yeah, so I hope that churches will reach out to me. Although I will, and I am starting to do some homework as far as where the churches are located, and if there's regions that seem to get more, you know, more incidences of crisis and disaster, I may be reaching out to churches, cold calling them. You know, I'm not afraid to cold call churches. But some of the things that will happen is, you know, upon first initial contact, what I plan on doing is sending out a brief survey. Some of the questions I may ask is just about your church size, your makeup, who is interested within the church about crisis response, if a church has responded or anybody within the church has responded in the past to crisis, just to kind of engage a little bit of where they're at church-wise. And then I'll set up a formal meeting with the pastor or the point person. The point person for this may be the pastor, or the pastor may say, you know what, I have enough on my platter, which, hello, pastors do have a lot on their platter, but I have a point person or two that I want to be able to kind of spearhead this. So I would work with them. We would set up, you know, a framework. I have a framework of policy and procedure, what this would look like, how and who to contact in community. And we'd start from there. Again, timing, it all depends on, you know, the ability for a church to be able to respond quickly enough. I would hope that by the end of a month, we'd be able to get some stuff on paper. I know that in church structure, you need to pass this through oftentimes through, you know, church voting. The elders or the trustees may need to approve this, so we need to get some stuff on paper. We would have some goals set up and tasks in order to achieve those goals. And, you know, I would be doing things with the church, specifically regionally and locally, on how it would apply to them. Maybe partnering with a local first response team would be a good thing, depending on where you live. Or maybe you live in a small town and the town next to you shares, you know, first responders. So you'd have to look to see, is other churches doing this type of stuff? And so it's really encouraging exploring what's already going on in the community and how you want to plug in. Encouraging partnerships within the community as well is going to be taking place. And I'll be leading and guiding and encouraging. Part of my story is you have to get past the no. You may go to the mayor's office and he says to you, nope, we don't need your help. But then you may find that the fire department says, you know what, we do want help. And let's try to figure out a way where we could partner together for future, issues. And so if you get no the first time, doesn't mean you're going to continually be turned away. I think the key is also helping churches to understand that we're doing this because the Lord is calling us to go out and help others. I think of the story of Joseph storing up the grains, and he was able to help later on. I think of Jesus feeding the 5,000 with no expectation later on of any more than he knew he needed to feed them at that time. And I think oftentimes as churches, we go in thinking, I'm going to go out, I'm going to give them Jesus right away. And we're going to be able to then have a whole bunch of people from this disaster come to our church then. I think you need to go out there knowing that I'm just going out there because the Lord wants me to be the light in the darkness. And he wants me to be a presence in the community and not just behind our four walls. And I think if anything, that's one of my main goals is getting us out as opposed to staying in, within our four walls. So I'll be leading and guiding that and encouraging that. So
That's
I hope
great.
that answered some of those questions.
Yeah. So it sounds like the timetable, it's adjustable to how quickly or how much time the church wants to take going through that. You get to know the resources that are there, and in the end, you come out with a written plan that helps speed up. You kind of made in advance decisions about how you're going to respond and who's involved in making decisions, so that you can quickly respond to a challenge like that. That's really great. Yeah, and I think that's so critical that one of the major challenges of the church in North America is most churches have become very inward focused. The outreach, what they consider outreach, is really ways to draw new people in to their facilities. It's not really outreach, and a lot of communities perceive that churches only do things for the benefit of themselves. So this is a remarkable opportunity for churches to bless their community, not seeking to get anything back, and for the community to see that is really, really powerful. I think it really gives you a different viewpoint too. The more that we're going through this, the more that we're looking into ministering to people through crisis, it looks like a lot of things that are going on within the church need to kind of be reevaluated. And I feel like that's one of the things that COVID has, and it's really hard to talk about, the good stuff with something as devastating as this virus. But a lot of times when you step back and you look at it, some of the positiveness that's coming out of this really is teaching us that we don't need programs as much as we think we did. We don't need, to have people physically in the church, but what people need is to get out and share in ways that are safe in order to do so. And so I think that with this development, I think that it's going to really change people's perspective on a lot of things, which is a good thing. Having a different perspective and having a different way of looking at things, especially as our culture is constantly moving and changing, and we are adapting to it, as opposed to being like, hey, what worked 20 years ago? Well, it's probably still going to work now, so let's do that and just continue to do it and inundate people with it, as opposed to looking at like, hey, here's new ways of doing it. And I think that this crisis thing, not to say that there's not organizations that aren't doing it now really, really well, but to say that like we as a church can set this out for ourselves too, and be that wave of change as
this situation with COVID changes, because Christ talks about not knowing when the end is coming, and before it happens, there's gonna be a lot of crisis. There's gonna be a lot of disasters, and so being prepared for it seems like it is the best thing to possibly do as a church, so that you can minister to as many people as possible, which is changing hearts, which then you will see the change in your church and the change in the people around you too. So we kind of talked about this a little bit, but I'd like to get your opinion on it, Kari, of what would you say are some of the benefits in doing something like this? Now, obviously we kind of talked through a little bit, but if you can just really highlight again what you feel like some of those benefits are, that would be greatly appreciated.
Yeah, and just pretend. So as you're answering this, Kari, just pretend like, I could see I could be a pastor or an elder thinking, the last thing I need right now is another project to work on. So why does this matter? Why should I do this? Maybe you can kind of answer it in that direction, Kari.
Yeah.
And really chastise Ryan while you're doing it too. Like really lay into him.
This really cynical look on my face.
Yeah.
I can't do that.
Prove it to me.
Prove it to you. Okay. Well, so I heard a great sermon on Sunday, a friend of mine who's a pastor down in Miami Beach, actually. So the blessing of...
I thought you were talking about my sermon. What?
Oh, I'm sorry.
No,
There's so many out there.
I didn't preach last week.
We joke around. My husband calls this the COVID. Okay, so we'll call it the COVID. So the blessing of the COVID is that we've been blessed to be able to check out not only our own home church at Bunker Hill, their services, but also I have a friend who, by the way, is a fellow chaplain. I deployed with him with the Billy Graham Association. He is now the chaplain for the Miami Beach Police Association. So, I'm not going to give him a plug that way, but you could see how when a church gets involved, they infiltrate the community. So I was listening to him speak, and as he said on Sunday, being an unprepared church, you can't suddenly become prepared. And so you cannot prepare in the middle of a pandemic. You can't prepare in the middle of a hurricane. You need to prepare. That's why there's the before that. In doing preparation and getting things on paper, you have the ability as a church to pivot. There's that big topic word. Can you pivot? It's out there in industry right now. You got to pivot. You pivot from working in-house to working out of your own home, and so the ability for a church to be able to pivot takes place only if it's been prepared. And so some people would say, well, how can I prepare for everything? Well, actually, if you have stuff on paper, you can refer to it and say, hey, if a tornado is going to hit or a tornado has hit, we know that we already know how to take care of our church facilities. But these are the steps that we're going to take because we have 2 or 3 point people that we can turn to. And they're going to immediately call, say it's the mayor, say it's your local community emergency response team, a CERT team, and find out how, at that moment what they need. Having that plan in place gives you the ability to immediately act. And when they say rapid response, I literally, Superstorm Sandy, I should say, came the next day I was on the shore. Why? Because I had a go-to bag. I was prepared. I knew it was coming. I was already prepared where my kids would go. My husband was going to be working throughout that whole thing as well. I already was prepared. And so for me, the key is preparing a church. And having it on paper, although some people are very much into not having things written down, it gives you a framework, where you're going. And it's important because there are people that are in your church that get frustrated because they can't help and they don't know how to. Another component that I hope to bring about is being able to give some training, a local church, and also hooking in churches to larger training programs so that if you're nervous about going out in disaster and speaking to people, how do I even do that? There are basics that could be given. But it's key because I find, again, you have the larger organizations, that are stepping out, like Billy Graham, Association Samaritan's Purse. Then you have the Red Cross. I do have to say, the Mormons do it well. And they're out there first too, and as are the Church of Scientology. And so if these seemingly what people would say are religious, which we're not going to go down that road and discussing that, but why should we not, as the church and as the Church of the Lutheran Brethren, say, hey, listen, we know the truth, we know the truth of Christ, but we want to get out there and be a presence so that we can, if there are questions that come up in the midst of it, and people ask, well, where is God in the midst of this? We can also bring truth as well as, help, physical, tangible help. And so, I mean, in this day and age, we need to recognize the importance of us being out there. And some of the things that are important that should be taking place. So my church has a food pantry, right? And so we were able to continue to operate through, COVID and through this pandemic. There are other churches that partner with local food banks, that the local food banks could not handle the overrun of people coming into them. And so churches, I know out in Arizona, actually became the spot for food to be given out daily because the food pantries couldn't do it anymore. And so if you have a plan in place and you're already an active part of your community as a church, then your pivot is going to be easy. You're pivoting from, and the pastors are already doing this, being online and being, pastors have pivoted. It's the church that needs to pivot fully. So that answers a little bit of being able to know the importance of this. Being a presence is important.
I would add to that too. Just kind of from a positive perspective, when your church responds to a crisis and helps out, it's an incredibly powerful bonding experience with the community. It changes the way the community that might not agree with your beliefs or have any respect for that before a crisis. It can really build a really powerful relationship between your church and the community. They come to value you in a new way, and they become more open to your presence in the community and the message that you have. And there's the opportunity for the gospel. And on the negative side, sometimes we're motivated by positive things. Sometimes we're motivated by negative. But I do believe on the negative side, sometimes we need a little law in our lives here. When churches ignore problems in the community, natural disasters and crises, every time we ignore those things, we become a little bit less relevant. And then when we want to come and say something spiritual or theological to our community, why should they listen to these people that don't care? Where were you when? ... Where were you when? So it's critical that we, I think we may think, well, we don't have to get involved in that, and our status in the community remains unchanged, and that's just not true. So on that lovely, discouraging note, I want to talk about a kind of another negative thing. A lot of churches don't do this kind of work. They don't do this kind of preparatory work. They don't develop plans like that. And there are a lot of, I think there are a lot of barriers that prevent churches from developing crisis response plans and for being there for their town, for their city, their community, their region in a moment of crisis. Kari, what are some of the barriers that you see that prevent churches from getting involved? I think when we are aware of barriers, they become less of an issue. We find ways around them. We find ways to mitigate them. What are some of the barriers that you see, Kari, that churches struggle with?
So I think one of the most important things that happen is fear overtakes, I hate to throw out a tagline. I actually have a buoy that says faith over fear. And as I shared earlier, you need to really step out in your fear because the Lord's already there ahead of you. He's already preparing the way for you to get out there. So I think that fear is a barrier, a fear of something not succeeding. And it's okay if it doesn't succeed that first time. It doesn't mean you stop trying. I think sometimes churches feel, do we have enough people? to do this? Are people equipped to do this? Again,
Yeah.
God calls people and then he equips them. He's equipping. And so we'll be able to also give people the ability to be equipped. Again, that I hate to bring this up again, but again, that inwardly focused part of the church. There's a lot of ministry that's going on in a lot of churches. And again, I am not saying there's anything wrong with all the ministry taking place, but a majority of ministry is really inwardly focused. And so how do we as a body pivot outwards and look for the needs in our community? And those are some things that we'll be, if a church calls me, we'll be touching upon that as well. It's not just in crisis, it's establishing those relationships before the crisis even hits, which will be important. And then being in it for the wrong reason, again, thinking that I'm supposed to be bringing people to the church, whereas I'm just supposed to love on people and, go. And I heard a great sermon about how Jesus, when he with the Samaritan woman, normally the Jewish people would travel around Samaria, not necessarily travel through, but with the Samaritan woman, they went into Samaria. He told his disciples, hey, you go over here, go get me some food, and he sat down by this well, knowing full well what was going on, and went out his way to interact with somebody. And so how did she recognize him? She recognized right away that he was Jewish. I mean, so he showed us through example the things that we're supposed to be doing, going out of our way, stepping out into maybe a different culture, a different way of thinking. And it will not always go smoothly, but the Lord will always be honored in that. So I think it's a lot of factors in churches, where we're this way, this is how we do things. I don't understand how these people are, hey, listen, growing up in Brooklyn, our youth group at the time when we were doing youth group, it was 95% Hispanic. I mean, obviously I'm not Hispanic. But we're a biracial family now, by the way. My son is Hispanic, but at the time I could have tried to change myself to make it seem like I was Hispanic. No, I mean, I'm white, but I went out and we worked with kids because we loved them. We're not going out because we're trying to make, I wasn't trying to make these kids more white. They weren't trying to make me Hispanic. It was because I loved. So what compels us? It's the love that Jesus gives us for our neighbors. And I think we need to revisit that as a church, who our neighbor is, who our community is, and what Jesus calls us to do. He didn't say to hang out and stay. He said, go and make disciples. So, I'm motivated by those things, and I want the church to be motivated by that. Yeah. So.
Yeah, that's great stuff. I really resonate with that. The fear, stepping out, and people fearing for that. And I think too that the Lord knew what we struggled with the most. So I just preached yesterday on Psalm 117 and talked about how there is a reason for the repetition, because in it says praise the Lord twice. And I said, there's a reason for repetition. God just doesn't repeat stuff without there being a reason for it. And one of the things that I pointed out was, what is the most used phrase in all of Scripture? And it is, do not be afraid. And it's repeated over and over and over again in Scripture. And there's a reason for it.
Wow.
It's because we are fearful as a nation. We are fearful as a generation, and realistically, the only person that wins in our fear is Satan. And so Christ is constantly combating that fear by telling us, not only in Scripture but in our lives, don't be afraid. You got nothing to be afraid. Like we're we're the ones that are on the offensive as Christians. We have it, and we can move ahead, charge ahead. Like you were saying, Kari, the go mentality is something that we can do because we don't have to fear. So, all right. So we're getting to that point where we're going to start wrapping up. And oh yeah, go ahead, Kari. What? I didn't want to cut you off.
I was just going to say, we have to remember, we know who the victor is in the end.
Yeah.
And so,
yeah, absolutely.
The victor, Jesus overcame all of this already. And so, yeah, I think that it's important to remember that and not to forget that. Yeah. So, amen.
Yeah, great stuff.
We
need to constantly be reminded of that. I mean, I'm a person who needs the reminder over and over and over again. You can ask my wife. You can ask Ryan too. Ryan has to remind me of a lot of stuff too. So, and it's the same in our lives too, in our spiritual walk. God needs to remind us, which is good. So, as we wrap up, Kari, if you could pick one or two important recommendations that you can give to our listeners that they can then either take back to their churches or start adapting within their own ministry, what would be one or two recommendations that you would make in helping us to serve our community better during a time of crisis?
So I think its intent is one of the big important things. There needs to be intentional preparation, intentionally prepping beforehand to reach into your community. So that's one big factor. And there needs to be intent in that. And also, I want to encourage pastors out there to start maybe preaching a little bit more about this. Scriptures time and time again remind us of going out. And I'd like to see maybe a little bit more preaching about going out there if it's not being done yet. If it's being done, then I want to encourage pastors to continue to do that. Hey, listen, there's only one thing that we bring to heaven, and that's people. Okay? It's not things. It's not programs. I mean, and believe me, I like pretty baubles too, but there's only one thing that we bring to heaven, and that's people. And if that is important to us as a church, it will translate to our appearance and our ability to be out there in the community. And people are the most important thing. So I want to encourage people to think that way, that people are the most important thing. Yeah. So
good.
Yeah. Thank you.
Good.
This makes you think, Kari, about how one of the challenges I think churches face when they're thinking about doing something like this is that when you're responding to crisis, you really have to circumvent the normal channels of procedure to respond rapidly. And that can be really intimidating for some. That can seem threatening for others. And so this kind of planning process, to preparing in advance, is really, it's a way to safeguard the organizational integrity of the church, because you're saying, in these types of conditions, we are going to change the way we make decisions, but it really, this plan places limitations around the kind of circumstances under which we're going to do that, so that no one gets power hungry or permanently circumvents the way the church operates, but it brings clarity and understanding for everybody about how we've agreed to change the way we operate so we can respond very quickly to this situation in a way that's in good order and in line with the mission of our church. So thank you so much, Kari, for your thoughts today. Thanks for your time. Thanks for being our guest today. Thank you to our listeners. Remember to vote for the Kari and Mike Sports Podcast. Weekly 6-hour episodes about the Jets, the Mets, and who you have to root for if you're from Brooklyn. See, I was listening to you guys before. Huh?
The Packers.
Yeah, she's a Packers fan. Remember, it's her husband who's a Jets fan.
The husband that's the Jets fan. Poor guy.
You didn't even like the suggestion that I might be implying that you're a Jets fan.
I don't think anybody likes the implication that somebody's a Jets fan, Ryan. I think, yeah.
I know a couple Jets fans.
Me too. But they
And
cry
they're so
regularly.
sad.
Yeah, they are. They are.
Wee.
Kind of sounds like being a Jets fan is kind of like being a Star Trek fan. That's kind of what I'm hearing.
Is that what it is?
Maybe I've got something in common with them.
Equate the Jets to like the time where the Israelites wandered through the desert for years. It's brutal.
Exactly.
Hopefully you'll get to the promised land though. We'll see how it goes. But keep
I don't know if
walking.
it's going to be on this side. Listen, Jets and Mets, it's the same boat. So, like I said, we always had 86 in the Mets,
Right.
We had 1986. So, anyway. So tune in for future podcasts about sports.
Yeah, totally.
So if you want to put in your vote for a Mike and Kari sportscast, or if you have a comment or question about something else, you can email us at podcast@clbforge.org. If you want to get started with a crisis response plan, CLB churches, there's no cost to you. We can get you in touch with Kari by emailing us at podcast@clbforge.org. Don't miss next week's episode when we talk to Dr. Alan Bierkus, the man who designed submarines and then designed the LB Discipleship Institute.
That's right.
Yeah. Don't forget to subscribe to our show. We'd love it if you share the podcast with a friend or a colleague. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.
See ya.